Hamster Princess of Mice and Magic by Ursula Vernon. Harriet and her faithful batter quail, Mumfrey. Chapter 1. Once upon a time, in a kingdom just over the next hill, there lived a fierce warrior hamster named Harriet Hamsterbone. Harriet's parents were a king and queen, which meant that she was a princess by definition. But Harriet herself was more interested in slaying monsters than in most of the traditional occupations of princesses. Up until a few months ago, she had been invincible, owing to a fairy curse gone awry. But now she was merely very, very stubborn. She was also a bit cross because she had to give up cliff diving. Cliff diving is a marvelous sport if you're invincible, but not so marvelous if you can actually break every bone in your body doing it. I don't know, Mumfrey, she said. If I go back home, Mom is going to try to get me to take deportment lessons. I don't think I can stand to balance a book on my head again. Quirk? Said Mumfrey, which is quail for yeah, but what are you going to do? I need an adventure, said Harriet. I need to do something. I'm nearly 12 and a half. Do you know how long it's been since I've fought an ogre? Quirk, said Mumfrey, which is quail for 7.5 weeks. That one didn't count. It was barely 8 feet tall. Quirk. And then it got a bloody nose and started crying, and I had to get it a tissue. They don't make ogres like they used to. The problem, Harriet decided, was that she was bored. The monsters had all heard about her. Many of the ogres had given up eating people and taking to vegetarianism in a big way so that she wouldn't show up and start whacking them with their sword. Jousting contests now had rules stating that if you had won in the last 3 years and you were a hamster whose name started with H, you had to sit out and let somebody else try. She had been away from home for 3 weeks, just trying to find something to do, and there was nothing. It's like the whole world is conspiring to keep me bored. Quirk, said Mumfrey, but he said it under his breath. Mumfrey knew that in a land containing dragons, ogres, dark knights, and fearsome curses, there was nothing half as dangerous as Harriet when she was bored. Harriet was trotting along on Mumfrey's back when she heard a voice from the side of the road. Good warrior, will you not stop and help a wretched old soul? The hamster reined in her quail and eyed the speaker suspiciously. There was a little old lady sitting on a rock by the side of the road. She was a shrew, but the smallest, oldest, most bent-over shrew that Harriet had ever seen. Please, mighty warrior, won't you spare a crust of bread for a starving old woman? Asked the shrew. Her voice was weak and creaky and sounded like an old door hinge in the rain. Now Harriet had had more than her fair share of experience with fairy godmice and wicked rat fairies and witches and curses. She was also nobody's fool. Nobody talks like that in real life, she thought to herself, and I'm about a 6-hour ride from the next village, which means that this old woman has been doing some hiking to get here. You should be polite to people on general principle, of course, but if you happen to be wandering through a magical land and a little old lady asks you for help, you should be extremely polite to her, just in case. Otherwise, you may well wake up with earthworms falling out of your mouth whenever you talk, or various other suitably awful fairy punishments. Sure, said Harriet, sliding off Mumfrey and rummaging in her saddlebags. I'd be happy to. Let's eat our lunch together. She had 2 cheese sandwiches and some carrot sticks set aside for lunch. Just to be on the safe side, she gave the old shrew the lion's share of the carrot sticks, along with the sandwich. She also made sure that her sword was within easy reach. You never could tell with fairies. You're so kind to a helpless old lady, dearie. Uh-huh. The shrew ate her sandwich and most of the carrot sticks, and also the cupcake that Harriet had been planning on eating for dessert. Then she belched loudly. "Thank you, dearie," she said, patting Harriet on the knee. "That was very gracious of you." "I'm glad that I could help," said Harriet. The shrew tapped her nose with a long claw. "Kindness does not go unrewarded. Do you know what I am, little hamster?" "A fairy. Actually, I'm a There was a brief, awkward pause. "I see," said the shrew, in a much less feeble voice. "Figured that out, did you?" "Sorry," said Harriet. "You're a bit far out of town for a real little old lady, and you rather overdid the helpless old lady thing. Plus," she cleared her throat, "it's your shadow. You haven't got one." "Bless it," growled the old woman, and whistled sharply. Her shadow, which had been cavorting with the flickering shadows of some willow leaves, jumped up and came sliding horridly across the grass. It fastened itself to her heels and hunched down, looking sheepish. "Silly old thing. You cut it loose once, and it gets in the habit of wandering off." The shrew scowled. "Well, I was going to send you on a quest. I figured." "You keep being so sharp, you're liable to cut yourself," said the shrew, looking cross. "Fine, off with you then. I'll wait for the next hero." Harriet sighed. That was the problem with fairies. Some of them were extremely touchy. "Well, if you've already got the quest lined up, I'm still available." No, I can see you're busy. Wouldn't want to impose. I mean, come on. I gave you my cupcake, didn't I?" "Well, it's possible that I might have another cupcake in here somewhere," said Harriet. "I was going to save it for Mumfree, but if you're going to send us both on the quest—" "Quirk," said Mumfree, annoyed. "That was his cupcake." "It's a good quest," said the shrew. "I wouldn't want to waste it on just anybody. It's birdseed and chocolate flavored. Quirk!" "Fine," said the shrew fairy, snatching the cupcake and devouring it in 3 bites. Shrews are almost always hungry. She licked frosting off her whiskers and patted the rock beside her. "Now sit down, dearie, and I'll tell you the story of the 12 dancing mice princesses." Chapter 2. "Far away from here," said the shrew fairy, "in a great kingdom to the west, lived a royal family of mice. The Mice King had 12 daughters. Their names were January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, and December, because the king had that sort of relentlessly logical mind. He also had 2 sons named Solstice and Equinox, but they fled the kingdom as soon as they were old enough. People like the Mouse King are difficult to live with. More than anything in the world, it was said, the princesses loved to dance. They danced foxtrots and tangos and square dances and reels. They danced waltzes and quadrilles and jigs and cotillions. They could dance any dance ever invented. A constant stream of dancing instructors went up to the palace and taught the 12 mouse princesses everything they knew, and then went home again, exhausted. "They're unstoppable. They've learned every dance I know." "They're crazy. I taught them every dance I remember, and a few I'd forgotten. How do they do it?" "Did either of you notice the shoes? Odd thing, those shoes. Very weird. Kind of freaky if you ask me." What the dancing instructors had noticed was the state of the shoes worn by the 12 mouse princesses. The shoes were made of silk, of course, in pink and ice white and sky blue, and they were carefully fitted to the feet of every princess like a glove is fitted to a hand. Yuck, said Harriet, who thought silk shoes were ridiculously impractical. And every morning the silk shoes were worn completely through. There were holes in the heel and holes in the toe, as if the princesses had been dancing all night. Eventually the king noticed as well. First he was very confused, and then he started to get angry. The oldest princess was 13 years old, and the youngest was 8, and they were going through an immense amount of shoes. The royal shoemakers were summoned and threatened with terrible punishments for making substandard footwear, but the shoemakers had sterling reputations and produced several dozen professional ballerinas who testified at their trial that these were very fine shoes indeed. The fault did not lie in the shoes. And if the shoes were not at fault, that meant the princesses were dancing their shoes off every night. This is considered very strange behavior for princesses, and the Mouse King did not approve of strange behavior. "Do you dance all night? Where do you go? Tell me!" But none of the princesses said a word. The Mouse King threatened his daughters with terrible punishments. He had them all grounded and doubled their homework and sent them to bed without supper and took away all their toys, but still none of them said a word. The Mouse King raged and yelled and stopped about the castle and would have come up with even worse punishments, but the court wizard stopped him. He had been conducting his own experiments and had a few suspicions. "Your Majesty, the princesses are clearly under a spell. Do not punish them, but rather seek how to break it. Right, you wizard, break that spell." "I'm really more of a research wizard. Also, I'm retiring next Wednesday." The Mouse King sent for other wizards, for knights and heroes and princes, for anyone who could find out where the princesses went at night and how they danced through their slippers. He offered half the kingdom and the hand of his oldest daughter in marriage if anyone succeeded, so there were quite a number of people eager to try. Stable boys and dishwashers turned up at the palace, hoping to be princes, but none of them ever succeeded. Most went away embarrassed. One slept so late that he had to be dumped into the moat to wake him up, and he fell asleep again while talking to the king. He was escorted to the edge of the kingdom and dropped there on his head. One or two of the people who tried were never seen again. The Mouse King became extremely grumpy. "This is not working." As for what the 12 mouse princesses thought of the matter, nobody was sure. Every night, all 12 were locked into a room of the palace, and none of them would ever say where they went or how. And every morning, their shoes were worn away to nothing. In this very unsatisfactory state of affairs, 6.5 years passed. Chapter 3. Harriet listened to the whole story from first to last. Her big pink ears stayed trained on the old shrew, not flicking from side to side to catch the sounds of the forest. And that is the story. When the fairy was finished talking, Harriet sat in silence. "Well, I'm thinking." "Oh, very well," said the shrew. She watched Harriet with bright black eyes. What Harriet was thinking was, there's more going on here than she's saying. After a few minutes, the hamster princess said, "Did they ever try tying the princesses up?" "What kind of question is that?" asked the shrew, a bit shocked. "A logical one," said Harriet. "I mean, if they've tied the princesses up and they got loose anyway, then there has to be someone helping them, right? Why not send them to another castle while they're at it? And they should have tried taking away the shoes and giving them very big stompy boots to see what happened." Harriet herself did not usually wear shoes. Hamsters don't, unless they're planning on walking through something disgusting. But when she did wear shoes, she preferred very large boots with steel toes and, if possible, spikes. Now we're talking. I was expecting you to be a bit more concerned for the plight of the princesses, said the shrew showerly. As a fellow princess and all, I don't mind telling you that I'm having second thoughts here. Harriet shrugged. She had not met very many princesses, and the ones she had met were all rather useless, and tended to spend a lot of time brushing their hair and singing duets with little forest animals. It was all very soppy. Okay, as a fellow girl then, said the shrew. Since they're under a curse, I'd think you'd remember what that's like. Look, said Harriet, if they're unhappy, they have all my sympathy, okay? But the Mouse King doesn't sound like a very nice man. Maybe the princesses like dancing. Maybe it's nobody's business where they go. But it's a curse. I liked my curse. It made me invincible into my 12th birthday. I could go cliff diving. Maybe they like theirs. Ugh. Being a hero doesn't appeal to you? Half the kingdom doesn't interest you, I suppose? I've got my own kingdom in a few years, said Harriet, and I'm already a hero. Ask any of the ogres if you can find one. Fine, said the shrew, sighing. If you're going to be like that, I suppose I'll have to tell you the rest of it. Harriet examined her fingernails and tried not to look smug. It is a curse, said the shrew. All the fairies know about it. There was a write-up in Fairy Godmouse today, but of course no one will tell the Mouse King the details. Every night, no matter where the princesses are, a door opens in the floor of their room. Whether they want to or not, the shrew said, the mice must climb down into the underworld beneath the castle, and there every night for almost 7 years they have danced. And if you tie them up? Asked Harriet again. Fine, said the shrew. The ropes come untied, if you must know. And if you move them to another castle, earthquakes. They can't go beyond the walls around the castle grounds, or the whole thing starts shaking and the turrets start falling into the moat. The king keeps guards to make sure they stay on the property for fear that the castle will fall down. Said Harriet. She had to admit that did sound like a pretty powerful curse. If somebody sleeps in their room? Ah, said the shrew. She tapped Harriet's knee with one long claw. Now you've got it. All those knights and heroes and princes and stable boys hoping to be princes, they get 3 nights. Most of them fall asleep and don't remember what happened, and a few of them have disappeared completely. Time is running out. If they dance for 7 years, then the spell will finally be completed, and the princesses will be trapped underground forever. They cannot wait any longer. They need a different kind of hero. Harriet rubbed the back of her neck. It did sound interesting, and she was awfully bored. Still, you didn't just go breaking other people's curses because you were bored. The princesses might love to dance, and they might not thank her for getting involved. I don't know. The shrew scowled. I didn't want to say this, she said, but if you do not help the princesses, Harriet Hamsterbone, then your own kingdom will be in peril. I have seen the future, and if the princesses are not freed, then the name of Harriet Hamsterbone shall be written in dust, and in a handful of generations the line of Hamster Kings shall end. She sat down with a thump. Written in dust, said Harriet, like somebody swept up some dust and wrote my name in it? That's just weird. Why would I be scared of that? The shrew groaned. It's a metaphor, like Your name won't matter because people won't remember it. Harriet looked unconvinced. Maybe you should focus on the bit with the hamster kings coming to an end, said the shrew. Right, said Harriet. How many generations are in a handful exactly? What? It's not a very scientific measurement, is it? The shrew put her long snout in her hands. Like, my parents are one generation, right? And I'm two. And if I have kids, which I suppose could happen in theory someday, that's three. If a handful is 3 generations, then we're already there, and that's bad. But if a handful is like 45 generations, then we're only a 15th of the generations involved, and I sort of feel like the other 14 15ths need to take care of themselves. I can't be responsible for everybody. I didn't have to give people quests, you know. I could have been the fairy that paints frosts on widow panes. There's good money in frost painting. I'm just saying, said Harriet. So how many generations are we talking about? Not that many, said the shrew. And how does this work exactly? The shrew rubbed her forehead. Look, the future isn't a straight line or anything. Probably one of the princesses will marry somebody who is planning on invading the hamster kingdom, and she'll talk him out of it. Or maybe she'll invent a better quail saddle, and one of your descendants who is going to fall off his quail and break his neck won't. Futures are squishy. All I know is that if you don't do this, your kingdom will suffer. I'm doing you a favor here, said the fairy. Right, said Harriet, climbing to her feet. If the future of the kingdom was at stake, she knew what she had to do. She held out her hand to the shrew. You've convinced me. One hamster hero, at your service.